The simplistic take right now is just that Bitcoiners are in a bad mood, but I think that completely misses the interesting nuance here that's actually happening inside the ecosystem. As price goes down, we're starting to see fragmentation of the Bitcoin community. And you can see that when looked at through the lens of Michael Saylor's four ideologies of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not just one unified internet trend anymore, it's made up of different factions that have different villains, different heroes, and talk about totally different things. For this most recent piece, I looked at three different groups: the Bitcoin capitalists, Bitcoin fundamentalists, and Bitcoin technologists over time, and analyzed the moods and how they differed from one another. And the most interesting dynamic about this is actually the conviction. So we're looking at the Bitcoin fundamentalists here, and as you can see, their net conviction levels over time was higher a couple of years ago and has been steadily declining over time. This is in stark contrast to the Bitcoin capitalists. This group has seen almost the exact opposite dynamic happen over the last couple of years. This is with ETFs getting approved. This is with the rise of the treasury companies and MNAVs being something we talk about much more frequently. This is not necessarily bullish or bearish, but in my opinion, it's indicative of the stories that each group are telling themselves. Despite the negative price action, the Bitcoin capitalists continue to feel very convicted in their view for Bitcoin. The adoption story is continuing to track over time in the way that they thought it might happen. To the fundamentalists, this might appear as a direct tension, that everybody running a node, everybody using on-chain Bitcoin, that's clearly not happening with some of the newer people adopting Bitcoin. The takeaway here is absolutely not that the fundamentalists are wrong. Bitcoin as a technology and the ability to self-custody is still absolutely profound. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all the newest adopters are going to share that belief with you. These are not the only two groups out there. Now we're looking at the Bitcoin technologists over a little bit longer 3-year period, and we're looking at the gratitude use in their language. And despite the negative price action, they are consistently more grateful right now in the language they're using. And I think there's a really informative thing happening here where the people that are in this group that are consistently building things and adding to Bitcoin, they're feeling pretty good about stuff. There may be negative price action, there may be infighting across the community, but for the Bitcoin technologists, they are just shutting up and building on Bitcoin, and I find that incredibly admirable. What really nailed this home for me is seeing how the different groups are talking about entirely different things. This is the net mention rate of MSTR, and it's not particularly surprising here that the Bitcoin capitalists are talking about MSTR way more frequently than the Bitcoin fundamentalists. Here you can see the mention rate over time. The exact inverse is true with the mention rates of paper Bitcoin, talking about kind of the same thing, these like institutional Bitcoin adoption things. But the fundamentalists are referring to this as paper Bitcoin in a very negative context where the capitalists aren't talking about it at all in that manner, and they're way more constructive and pragmatic about the individual stocks that are getting adopted. And once again, the Bitcoin technologists are just out here talking about the technical details of Bitcoin, relatively isolated from some of the drama happening right now. Right here, we're looking at Bitcoin fundamentalists' anger comparatively to the Bitcoin technologists. You can really see that during the present changes in the market, the fundamentalists are much more angry. And this is coupled with that low conviction that we've seen. I think the wrong and overly simplistic takeaway here is to say that the fundamentalists are losing. I don't think that's right. I think that the core ethos of Bitcoin is still as strong as ever, and the network is still absolutely working well from a fundamental level. But what this is indicative of, in my opinion, is that clearly some of the narratives that are being driven by the technologists are continually finding adoption, even if the other groups don't agree with it. And that although some of the conflict right now might feel existential, it's clear that people that have been here a little bit longer and those who are actively building on Bitcoin don't necessarily feel this way. I think this is a good reminder to stay optimistic and to keep actually moving forward and making things, not to just get lost in arguing with your friends on Twitter. This conflict is not necessarily bearish either. Bitcoin is now successful enough that it has different communities talking about totally different things. And one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin, in my opinion, is its ability to align incentives in a way where people in totally different groups that dislike each other actually economically benefit from adoption by the other groups. The thing I want to leave you with is to not let the current mood out there impact you too much. Just because you see fighting out there in the timeline doesn't mean that Bitcoin is losing adoption or the crisis is existential. If anything, I think it's a really constructive time to be an optimistic contrarian. If you find this interesting or want to get deeper in any of the charts that I shared today, I have a full, much more detailed written piece that I'll make sure I share below. Peace.